Good afternoon, everybody. So isn't it so exciting to be here having lunch with Anna Deavere Smith? Thanks. It sort of takes the old saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, to take care of, I think Michelle Smith is here with us today. I have not had a chance to meet yet, but this lunch was actually made possible by the generosity of Michelle Smith and the Robert H. Smith Family Foundation, where they sponsor a roundtable series here at Aspen, which actually makes it possible to invite colleagues and friends from all walks of life to join us for lunch, good food, and wonderful conversation and people. So thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Anna, for taking the time to be with us today. So before we jump into the conversation around an artist's voice, catalyzing social change, I have the privilege of knowing some of you, but not all of you, so I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Anne Mosle. I am a new colleague here at the Aspen Institute with a new program called Ascend, 2 Generations, 1 Future. And the work that I'm doing in that with colleagues here is looking at the growing number of children growing up in single-parent families, predominantly women-headed families. Many of us know this, experience this, but how do we really think about how do economics, education, and engagement come together? And come together in a way that really build on the resilience and the strength of families and kids and move them forward. So one of my reasons to actually join Aspen was I was lured here by the sheer brilliance and warmth and vision of Anna Deavere Smith, who serves on the board. And when this opportunity, sometimes you might think this would be an arts conversation here at Aspen, not really one about vulnerable families and about poverty. But when I had the chance to meet Anna, as many of you have as well, she brings voice and vision to the issues that many voices that don't have the chance to be heard. And so when we were thinking about the performance today, I wanted to sort of bring James Baldwin, probably one of your colleagues in many ways, a playwright from Harlem. He has a quote where he says, "The world changes according to the way people see it. And if you can alter it, even by a millimeter, the way people look at reality, then you can change the whole world." Well, I think that's what Anna Deavere Smith does in everything she takes on. So you all might know Anna is actually born and bred in Baltimore. Mother was a principal and a teacher. Stories of young boys, girls at the table, extra work at night as well as in the school. Father was a coffee merchant. Grew up in Baltimore when it was a segregated city. She is a playwright, a professor, a woman who walks through across the country, across the world truly. She's been a professor of drama at Stanford, currently a professor of performance art at NYU. And anybody who spent just even an ounce of time with Anna knows she doesn't sort of suffer fools lightly. If you're serious about what you're doing, she's serious about being with you. And so I've heard stories about students having to jump rope 20 minutes before you start class. Get them going.
I do it with them. I mean, they should be it.
But today we're going to really sort of jump into the conversation. I'm sure many of you had the chance to see some of the plays, Fires in the Mirror, Twilight, capturing both the Crown Heights time in Brooklyn, the LA riots. She does not shy away from tough subjects. She has been taking Washington by storm with Let Me Down Easy, which is about healthcare, but it's really about life, end of life, vulnerability, compassion, when we see it, when we don't. So with no further ado, I'm sure many of you have had a chance to see it. I want to sort of get into conversation with Anna. And Anna, so this play started when you were sort of just the very beginning, when Yale Medical School invited you to come up and help them with how they were doing their work. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Anne, for everything you do and how much you teach me about generosity and how much you teach me and are teaching me about organization and chutzpah and the word yes in a society where, you know, no is a more efficient word. It's less letters. You know, Wynton Marsalis told me that Miles Davis told him one time the only answer to every question was no. Now, that was useful for Miles Davis because he could spend his time practicing instead of doing other things. So thank you for teaching me more about yes and the expectation of getting yes. You mentioned James Baldwin. I want to say something about Yale and James Baldwin that kind of will set I think help make our lens for the conversation today. I was invited to Yale Medical School to come and interview doctors and patients and to present at medical grand rounds. I guess nobody can hear me. To perform at medical grand rounds, which is, a pretty fancy affair that doctors come to first thing in the morning. I mean, 7:30, 8 o'clock, not very palatable for an actress. But but also I was just concerned about making a fool of myself with doctors. What did I have to offer, and particularly performance? But I did it, and we can talk about more about that. And I revisited what happened at Yale 5 years later and began creating Let Me Down Easy as a result of that. But one of the things that Yale also wanted me to do, in addition to the commission of making the play, performing it at grand rounds, was to have an interaction with sort of every level of student or resident at Yale. And they put together this evening with the students from the Yale School of Drama, which of course one of the best schools of drama in the world, and residents, right? In this old library at Yale. And it was real clear who was who, because all the theater students sat on one side, wrapped up in their scarves and their things of tea and their echinacea and their all these things, and their hair and their, creams. And on the other side are these people in, Brooks Brothers clothes, blazers and everything. And the first question was a young woman, African-American director in her third year at Yale. Professor Smith, I'm so sorry, I'm just so moved. I'm sorry, please. But I've been reading James Baldwin all day. And he writes about the fear and the terror of being an artist. Could you just say a few words about the fear and the terror? And across the room are these residents sitting there dealing with real fear and terror, real life and death, just horrified. So my whole thing about art and society is basically, can we help the doctors and the technicians cry, and can we give the artists a little bit more science and objectivity?
Oh, that's terrific. And I think, one of the things that's so incredible about Let Me Down Easy, the timing of it. You just sort of timed it quite right, where now we've had a bunch of rigorous, vigorous debates, not so much understanding, not so much meaning, but a lot of big changes, and that might potentially come undone or not. And so when you were going through, and I've never seen anybody navigate Washington or just the worlds of politics, art, media, community like you, Anna. And I'm wondering, how you went about sort of selecting your characters. You interviewed more than 300 people in depth, and then how you came to the selection that you chose, from a bullfighter to a prize fighter, from leading academics to a mother. How did you go through that process, understanding the political context, the timing of it, and kind of make those decisions to pick those characters? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Luckily, I had theaters and people who were interested in this work, and the gift that any artist can get is the gift of time. And in my work, I need a lot of different kinds of people to help me do my work. So I was able to do some workshops in Texas through the generosity of a person there, Chula Reynolds. I was able, she's very involved with MD Anderson Hospital. I was able to get a lot of interviews done there, thanks to her. And then the theaters themselves. There was one director, one artistic director who said, maybe it's too early for you to pick a director. I don't know what you're going to do. I'll sit in a room with you. Unheard of. And I went up to the Long Wharf Theater, and he sat in a room, and I just spoke characters, and we talked about them, right? So different workshops, different productions. 2 other productions had more to do with human rights. When I took it to Cambridge, the theater associated with Harvard was very interested in the fact that I had a lot of material from a trip that I did to Rwanda 10 years after the genocide as a part of making Let Me Down Easy, because ultimately I'm interested in the vulnerability of the human body and the strength of the spirit, whether that's a vulnerability to the state, to health care, to poverty, to the fact that the rumor is true, we are mortal. So I had different productions, and then in terms of timing, when it was, you know, a lot of people thought it was 2 plays. People say, you got to take that genocide stuff out, the genocide stuff. Got to take that out. You know, other people, Mike Nichols, my friend, came to see it, and of course, you know, he looks very deeply, and he was, you can't take that out. This play is really about kindness, right? So I twisted that in my head to mean grace, and I went around and talked to a lot of people about grace, and so one production sort of looked at that. But when it was time to come to New York is when the president had the bill out in public, and I thought, well, what I should do now is to focus the play so that it can tell the human side of the debate that's going on in politics and in the media, and that's what happened.
It's just amazing, and it feels like it's been so receptive. I mean, people have been, it's sold out every night here at the Arena Stage. She's opened up the Krieger Theater studio here at the Arena Stage. And I was wondering, from when you were performing in New York and the reactions you had there, and the time that you're now here in Washington, do you feel a difference in the audiences or the reactions, or does
You know, nothing substantial. I'm happy that being here, I had the opportunity to get the invitations of Secretary Sebelius and Dr. Collins to perform 20 minutes of the play, both at Department of at HHS and also at the National Institutes of Health, with them talking to me afterwards. So I'm really happy that in Washington it was able to be of use, you know, clear use. I really like that.
And what about the media? How about the interactions with the media? Have you seen people sort of open up, think differently? Any insights on that?
With me or with the healthcare in general?
With the health, well, with through the play of Let Me Down Easy and sort of conversations, or?
I don't know, you know, and I think when you were giving me all that praise in the beginning, you know, I always want to say, oh, you know, that's not true, and then I think about Golda Meir. You guys know the famous quote, "Don't be humble, you're not that great." And so I do have I think I have a healthy dose of humility about what my work can do and what art can do. It is kind of catch as catch can. So that's why particularly I like it when somebody like Secretary Sebelius or Francis Collins or the SEIU who came last night, when they say, oh, we can use this. I like that, because then it's concrete and I know what's going on.
That's great. Well, and of all the characters, was there one that captured your heart, or also one that you weren't able to include that you still miss?
Well, I miss many of them. I mean, but out of these 320 people that I interviewed, the 20 who are performed on stage have a couple of things in common. One is that they are all talking about love, something that they love. They're all bringing love to the stage. And the first character, James Cone, I asked him, great philosopher and theologian, who I was introduced to by Elaine Pagels, actually, who's on the board here at Aspen. And you know, when I asked him, what do these words "Let Me Down Easy" mean to you? He said, well, it's about love, right? And then ultimately I said, well, what about death? And he says, well, it could be about death too. But so the first messenger of the play is telling you that what you're going to see for an hour and 40 minutes or an hour and 36 minutes is about love. And every one of the 20 people is bringing a sort of descant on love, right? The most progressive message in the play is brought by the most conservative person, a Republican cowboy from Shoshone, Idaho, who feels that we should have a flat rate and doesn't say very nice things about wealthy people, you know. And then the other thing that these 20 people have in common, and so there is no favorite because they all do this, I'm a student of expression, they all have extraordinarily fascinating ways of trying to complete a sentence and of their gestural behavior. So that's really what I spend my time doing, is studying how they speak and how they move. So yeah, I mean, there are lots of people that I now miss. An extraordinary young woman who was 6 years old during the genocide, who was lost her whole family, was alone in a forest, washed the machetes of the Hutus who killed the Tutsis by pretending that she was a Hutu, is now at Stanford Medical School. Doing pre-med at Stanford. I mean, extraordinary. I miss that story. I miss how she used language. I miss her courage. I miss the extraordinary, experiences she's had. I actually met her at Aspen, thanks to the Bezos family, who, have this extraordinary program. They find these young leaders from all over the world who are found because they're in positions of vulnerability.
That's terrific.
And yet they are going to be leaders.
Well, you capture as well as the love, that strength and that resilience, that just framing it that way and lifting it up to the opportunity. Well, the relationships that you have built through this. I mean, I'm wondering about, I had the pleasure to meet Ruth Katz with you, one of the characters in the play. And you have maintained a close relationship. Do you always maintain the relationships? And with the other characters in the play, Lance Armstrong, I mean, how do you maintain?
Everybody brings up Lance.
Everybody, you have to. But how do you manage that and maintain that? How does that go?
Well, in my other work, I don't think it was an issue. I mean, if people came, they came. In this play, for some reason, we always invite people. But this play, maybe because it was going on for so long, so many years and so many different productions, I really did make a real effort to get everyone to see it, and because it's gone on so long, I've had the opportunity to develop relationships with the characters, and there are only 20 of them. I say only 20 because my play House Arrest had 50, the big play about the Los Angeles riots had 43 characters. Almost everyone has seen it. I don't know what they really think. I'm sure they have ambivalences about it. But as you know, Ruth gave me a party last week, and I was saying that I'm one of the few playwrights that's ever had a character who threw a party for him. So
it's pretty fantastic. It's pretty fantastic. Well, one of the things that you and I have had the chance to kind of catch up with on a sort of an annual check-in out the Ideas Festival out in Aspen, we sort of come together and have a little chat about race in America, and sort of race and class and power and all of that good stuff. And I was, I was going back and actually watching your one of your performances at TED. I think it was TED at Monterey, and you were channeling Studs Terkel, and looking at sort of, we're not just one experience, we're the aggregation of all of our experiences. And so I was, thinking of you and channeling you, and going back to 1991 with Fires in the Mirror, and just how raw the experience of Crown Heights was, and then LA and Twilight following. And for many people, a lot of people were shocked with the race riots. And for many others, it wasn't so surprising. And it was a moment where I think you took something that was somewhat of a wake-up call for our country, and you almost made it more of a learning moment. And when I think about where we were in early 1990s and where we are 2011, and all the work that you've done along the way, and then here you are at healthcare, this sort of major issue for all of us. How are you feeling, experiencing, thinking about sort of race and healing, equity, those kinds of issues? What's been some of your learning along the journey?
Well, one thing that pleases me is that there's a character in Let Me Down Easy who's a young white doctor, privileged, went to Barnard, was then educated in New Orleans at Charity Hospital, a public hospital in New Orleans. Debate about whether Bellevue or Charity is the first hospital for poor people in America. And she talks about her shock during Katrina, when at Charity they were the last to be evacuated. And this was not surprising to any of the people who worked there. They didn't even expect to be helped at all. And I would say that of the characters, she and a white woman who runs an orphanage for children who are dying of AIDS in South Africa, those are the two characters that the audience most often says they were attracted to, were moved by, wanted to know more about. And who comes to the theater? People with certain kinds of advantages, either intellectual or financial advantages. So the fact that people are responding to those characters who are talking about vulnerable people when there's lots of powerful people in the play, right? Means to me that as Americans, we do open our heart to those who are vulnerable, and there's a great place for caring about them. That's what I've experienced so far. In not just doing this in theaters, but taking those characters around the country in different places when I speak and being able to perform them. And I think this folds into some of the work that you're going to do here at Aspen, which is just so important, and I hope timely.
Me too. And I think this social change piece, the ability to change hearts and minds is at the core, and bringing people into that human connection is really powerful.
I mean, this young woman I told you that I'm a student of expression, and I'm so interested in how people talk and what they say. So this young doctor, at a certain point in her interview, says to me about charity. She says, you know, one of the most, she goes like this, she says, probably one of the least pleasant parts of my job at Charity Hospital, a public hospital in New Orleans, is that I see people who come in to train at Charity, right, just like this. And even though they have, in my mind, a tremendous opportunity to see exactly what it is like, in some sense, I mean without living it, she leans forward, to be poor, and to open your heart and open your mind to these fantastic people we have coming into the hospital. These fantastic people. The poor black people with no prenatal care. These fantastic people.
That was a wonderful moment.
That sparked my imagination. I said, oh, you know, I think about some of the debates we've had. I was the first artist in resident at the Aspen Institute, thanks to Sidney Harmon. And that first summer, I remember I did a panel, and we were talking about education, right? And we're talking about what it would take. Somebody earlier had talked about what it would take to get Americans to really think of all children as our children, right? So I thought about that as an act of imagination. That's an act of imagination, to really be able to imagine that every American child is our child. And so whenever I trip over these people who, whether it's on a panel at Aspen or somebody like Kirsten Kurtz-Burke, who find another way of articulating that help us see it as an opportunity, not just for them, but for all of us, it's interesting to me.
Well, you've been an incredible pioneer in that, and I was, you know, sort of wondering when we think about other artists like Sarah Jones, Eve Ensler, Heather Raffo, and how they've used theater, art to sort of keep social change conversations going. And my daughter, I have a 10-year-old daughter they're doing their 5th grade production of Harlem Renaissance, and she's Augusta Savage. So we've been having these great conversations about what it was like to be an African-American woman, sculpture, doing art in 1930s, and thinking about from where we've been and where we are and where we're going, and thinking about art and its ability to change minds and raise different issues. Sort of how do you feel, because I know you care so much about history and where we've come from, but then thinking about this generation of many women, but really women and people of color, bringing their voice and their perspective into the artist arena and using that really as the powerful venue as you described.
Well, we have to see. I know Miss Michelle Smith, who's been so kind as to make this possible for us, is also very dedicated to education at the University of Maryland. She and her family have done some extraordinary things, and you know, I know there that they have taken another look at how young artists are being educated. You know, the bad news about my generation is, to be blunt, and sometimes I run my mouth, and you've already said that I don't shy away from the tough issues, but you know, my generation did not a whole lot of people of color left standing. From when I started out, because of the explosion of the 60s, there were all kinds of people, all kinds of theaters. A lot of that's not here, a lot of those artists aren't here. So I do hope that the sort of promise that I see in the many young people who write to me and want advice, and I've written a book called Letters to a Young Artist to try to help with that, and many people wanting to work in ways outside the box. Yesterday, 2 days ago, a young artist from Finland interviewed me and said, what advice would I give the people who are doing my kind of work? And I said, well, I don't want them to do what I did, you know, that I was trying to do certain things. I said, be original. And the other thing is to find other ways, new ways to interact with institutions, existing institutions, and ways that authority works in the quote-unquote art world. Because that's the only way we're going to get new voices. It's the only way that we're going to have any kind of real, for lack of a better word, diversity in terms if you did a study, if Aspen did a study of who runs institutions, it's not very democratic. Actually, corporate America had more success. I was an artist in residence at MTV Networks and helped them with their diversity project. Tom Freston wanted MTV Networks to be one of the most hospitable. This was a real priority for him. You look around MTV Networks, you got a whole lot more people of color in position of power than we have across the country in the art world. So this is serious, and this is our culture. This is our culture. This is where we have another ability to have influence. And if we don't have better representation there, we're in trouble, and people can't afford to go to school. $40,000 a year is ridiculous. You know, I went for free. I was paid. You know, I wasn't planning to be an actress. I went to California looking for a social movement. It was over. You know, called up a theater because I had a lot of free time. Actually, I was working in a junior college, and it was an amazing experience, what I did there. And had some free time after I'd sort of managed to buy a car and quit my other job working in a drive-in movie theater in the concession stand. And called up this fancy theater not knowing it was fancy and asked if they need stage managers, and the African-American woman on the switchboard, you know, sort of, oh, my dear, you know, like, how naive are you, country bumpkin? And tripped into an acting class, thought, oh, I want to do something for social change. Everybody's changing. Maybe I should hang around here. Then they put me in the company because the one African-American woman quit, and then I was ready to come to New York, and the guy saw me walking through the green room, the big cheese. He beckons me and he says, I hear you're going to New York. I said, yes. He said, well, we want to start an MFA program. We need students. Why don't you stick around? So I got a stipend. These kids are paying $40,000 and more. Yeah. And they're not going to work. I mean, out of 10, 2 are going to have a career. So, you know, that also tells us who will be the people who are helping create our culture.
Yeah, it's a powerful thing, and where the corporate piece, as you say, there's a real attention to the bottom line, and how the demographic shifting really catches up to all parts of society is a critical opportunity. Well, let's just talk a little bit about TV. So what was it like, Nurse Jackie, National Security Advisor? I mean, I always think of Anna on stage, but also checked you out on the TV too. So what was that experience like for you in terms of raising your voice, participating inside and behind the scenes?
So 2 funny stories, since I just gave you that sobering and possibly, you know, not very happy news about the art world. So as Anne knows, in the 90s, the Ford Foundation was very generous and gave me a very, very, very large grant to have an institute at Harvard in the summers called the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue, dedicated to finding artists who are doing work on social change and convening them and giving them a good gig and some, you know, good food and stuff like that summer in Boston. And so I get this call to go on the West Wing, and it was like in days Susan Beresford was coming, the then president of the Ford Foundation, and Allison Bernstein, then vice president. And I had, you know, this is like a big deal because the project was over, they were coming. You can imagine how we were preparing for that. So it was to go on the West Wing, and I said, I can't do it. So my publicist, the late Stephen Rivers, called me and said, you get on that plane. I'm arguing. He said, get on the plane. I don't care. You go out there. So this is in 2000. Now, there was some buzz, that Condoleezza Rice was going to be National Security Advisor if Bush won. So I knew Condi because I was at Stanford and she was my provost. So when I arrived at the set, I saw Aaron, and I'd been in his movie, American President. I said, thank you so much, Aaron, for inviting me to do this. Now, were you thinking about Condoleezza Rice when you thought of my character? Is that why you want me to do this? And he said, who? So my little joke is, I'm the first African-American woman national security advisor. And on September 11th, I was on a runway, a plane that was supposed to take off at 9:04, could not get back into the city, was standing around a Marriott because I just got in the first moving thing, which was a van. And Sandy Berger will tell the story that people were coming up to me. And he had been my, I'd call Sandy whenever I got a script to say, what does this mean? What do I do? So
that is hilarious.
That's our country. Anyway, and the power of culture. And then in terms of Nurse Jackie, which I'm on right now and I love so much, and interesting, isn't it, that it's about healthcare, and I get to play the very unappealing Mrs. Acolytis. I was in a gym. I told this the other night. I was in a gym in Sun Valley, and a woman came over to me, and she said, you know who you look like? She said, you look just like that woman in Nurse Jackie. And without thinking, I said, that's an insult. Because I forget that it's me. You know what I mean? It's not that I forget who I am, but I forget, I'm so involved in the inner world of Mrs. Acolytis that I forget that it's me.
Well, so you're still on the road. You've got more shows to do, people to meet. But when you think out on the next horizon, one of the things I know we've been working a little bit on is your Anna Deavere Smith Works nonprofit work and thinking about artists around the world and social change. So I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about that and what's your vision for that and kind of what's going on in that space.
So Anna Deavere Smith Works is a place for artistic excellence in social change. So the charge is to try to find the people who exemplify that those two things can come together. So a lot of times we think, well, if it's about social change, it's going to be didactic, it's not going to have artistic excellence, or you don't get to be Yo-Yo Ma unless you're constantly practicing on your cello. So how do we put those two things together? And I think the time is now. It was my enterprise that I started in the 90s at Harvard, and this is another version of it. I'm finding artists from all over the world who are absolutely fascinating and who are dedicated to using the media of art, the media of their skill set, to have influence, to say the things that politicians can't say. Politics is a very, very, very sophisticated use of language and influence. And the media is now too, and the media, has become another form of entertainment. So where will we be able to convene people around some of the problems and projects that concern us and that we love so much? And so I think that art gives us the opportunity to do that convening. So I hope to continue, as we just did with the Mellon Grant, convened some wonderful artists from around the world for a week in New York at NYU. We are going to be doing a conference in Abu Dhabi this spring through NYU Abu Dhabi. And so when you convene people, first of all, you find out if there is a movement, you give it a name, you give them courage. Most of these people are sort of, that I'm interested in, all work outside the box. They're very resilient people. One of them is Din Q. Lay, a great, wonderful media artist who just had a beautiful piece at the Museum of Modern Art, where I'm actually on the board. And he had, Glenn Lowry actually says there's a movement of people who were here who are now going back home. So his family had fled Vietnam. He was educated here and then went back to Vietnam, where he's trying to get a movement going there. And so when we're sort of all, huddling around, trying to give him courage and, stick with it and what's next, at one point he said, well, I heard from the cultural police. And I said, look at what you're doing when you talk about the cultural police. It's got like, if I heard from the cultural police, I'd be all scared. I said, you seem to be delighted that you're going to have this opportunity to meet with the cultural police. So So that's what it's about, and hoping also to influence education and how we're educating artists. And the good news to me is that when the new dean of Juilliard took over, he was quoted in the New York Times saying that it was time for Juilliard to open up its windows and have its students more involved in the world. And I called him up. I literally called him up and said, Ara, did you really say that? Or is that a misquote? And he said, I did. And so if Juilliard, you know, the mansion on the hill, where it is about, you know, playing your cello, developing your voice, if even they think that artists need to find a new way of combining excellence with the world outside, then the day is here.
Oh, that's terrific. And when we just think about civic engagement and the role of social media, just I'm sure everybody's like half in your mind thinking about the square in Egypt. Just information flowing, people connecting. I think, you know, the artist in Iran or in Afghanistan or in Anacostia, just voices have a chance to break through. And it's exciting that sort of the institutions are also, you know, want to stay in the game from their mansion on the hill. So one last question for me. I feel wildly selfish having all this, you know, great time with Anna. I'm not going to even let her leave town off to the sunny San Diego, but for the continued production. But so future plans. You have talked a little bit about you run toward the big ideas, the tough challenges. You are not someone who sort of says, you know, I have a hammer, I'm going to look for a nail. You are on a bigger level. When you think about education, incarceration, you've also talked about maybe wanting to go home to Baltimore a little bit. Sort of what's on your mind for future areas to explore?
Well, you never know, and there are no lack of ideas. I always get scared when you talk about them. You think you've done them and you haven't. But I have a lot of energy for people who are vulnerable. And that's my interest, and my next project will have something to do with a form of vulnerability.
Excellent. Look forward to that. So we have a fantastic audience of leaders from all walks of life here in Washington, and so I'd love to open it up for questions. Devin back here has a mic, so if people want to just maybe introduce yourself to Anna with your question, and we will go. And the great thing is, just so we know, we are social media savvy, thanks to the Aspen communications team, so we're talking to everybody right now, as well as everybody in the room. Any questions or?
Good afternoon. I want to first of all thank you so much for spending part of your afternoon with us. My name is Melissa Crawford, and what I also wanted to do is really just commend you on taking the step to tackle these issues that you have. I think oftentimes entertainers kind of underutilize their platform to really make a difference in the community. So I, again, commend you for going against the status quo. And so here's my question, and it starts with an adage that perhaps many of us have heard, and that is that we are seen through three different lenses: how we view ourselves, how others view us, and how we want to be viewed. So my question is, when, at the end of the day, what do you see in terms of how you want to be viewed by others and in terms of your legacy? Because I could tell you how I view you. I view you, again, going against the status quo and being very courageous and even sharing some of your vulnerable moments. But just from your perspective, how would you like to be viewed?
Well, I have to say that I do want to be viewed as an artist who delivers every once in a while a performance that is trying for that which is meticulous. How's that for a roundabout answer? I'm trying for that. And I'm fine if you just see my effort. I know how impossible it is to get it exactly right. So if you see my effort, and well, a lot of people want to be effortless, but if you see my effort and you're moved by that, and if you yourself learn something from that, that's good enough. And then I want you to hear what people who can say it much better than me, I want you to hear that. And I want you to maybe remember something that I've found on my journey of this play, Let Me Down Easy, is part of a project I've been doing since the late 70s called On the Road, A Search for American Character. I want you to hear it because I thought it sounded very beautiful. And then I probably would like you to think, well, she's a 5'10" on a good day, sometimes 5'9½", light-skinned African-American, educated woman from Baltimore, and she's acting like a right-wing bull rider cowboy. And if she can embody that, maybe I can think about that person differently. Or Hazel Merritt, who had a horrible experience happen to her daughter while she was having dialysis. So I would like you to remember me as a person who is reaching, and you know, that maybe you'll think about reaching too. Does that sound too high and mighty? Okay.
That's great. That's great. Great. Oh, okay. Want me to go over here?
Hey, thank you again for being with us. My name is Brooke. I'm really interested to hear when you had the opportunity to perform at the boards for doctors. What were the conversations after your performance like among the providers?
Yeah, I wish Ruth were here, Ruth Katz, who's in the show and who was one of the people in those original grand rounds. I will say that I don't know what all the conversations were like because I was then sort of taken around where pre-existing conversations were already going on to try to add something to that. Yale did invite me back several times, and the person who hired me there then became head of internal medicine at Stanford, and in the last couple of years has invited me twice to do grand rounds at Stanford. Young doctors tend to come up and say, thank you, because it's reminding me why I got into medicine, which is, you know, I want to heal people. And I think modern doctors have many challenges, not the least of which is that they're in an age of extraordinary opportunities given by science and technology. But just because you're a scientist and just because you've learned all your science doesn't mean that you're a healer.
Oh, yeah, and that was very powerfully put in the play from the Dr. Pizos from Stanford, and about the time to talk to people, just to talk to the patient about dying. The woman behind, and then we'll go over to this side.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Reed, and I was thinking when you said Baltimore and projects, do you know about Harriet Lackey, the woman who donated?
I do. I was just
seemed like an
talking to
interesting possible project.
Thank you.
She donated her, she didn't know she donated her.
Henrietta Lack.
Yeah, but her cell was, her DNA was used or something like forever, and nobody ever has been able to, everybody has benefited by it except her family.
Okay. Devin, can we go over here with Andrea? Oh, thanks, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Andrea Levier, and I'm lucky enough to come tonight to see you
Thank
with my
you. Glad
son,
you're
who's going to
coming.
go to medical school
Great.
next year.
You'll like it.
And many of us were heartbroken, to go back to your story, about how poorly healthcare reform was communicated. If you were communications director at the White House, which you almost were on West Wing, how would you have done that differently?
I would never answer that question. That's one thing. I wouldn't ask a fool like me. I mean, you know, the highest praise you can give an actor is they're a fool. I wouldn't ask a fool like me to actually speak in Washington, D.C., where it's the haute couture of language. I will say this, something I have observed that I think is now going to work in the favor of the people working with the president, is one thing that the right seemed to be able to do was to show what would be taken away. And I think now the opposite possibility is there, is to show what the right will take away. But I mean, I suppose it was a very challenging job with such a thick document. to find ways to communicate it rapidly. And I did a project here about the press and the media in the 90s. And I traveled on both the Clinton and the Dole campaigns and interviewed 520 people. And I think that it is kind of a miracle, quite frankly, that anybody gets any message out. And it's much bigger now because of social media. And, you know, that's the first time I ever heard that expression. George Stephanopoulos is the first person that told me that expression, rapid response, right? I mean, that's just as early as the 90s that became the status quo. So the fact that one has to respond so quickly, I think it's amazing that they got out as much as they did. Now they have another chance.
Gentleman in the back.
My name is Rick Gross, and I'm a friend of Ruth Katz. And during the performance, I shut my eyes, and I could believe that was Ruth on the stage. That's how much I thought you had channeled her. Can you talk to us a little bit about technique, or what you're willing to share with us about technique? When you interview, do you tape? Do you listen to the tapes? How do you become these people to such an extent that with my eyes closed, I thought Ruth was there, not you?
That's very nice, but that's also the power of your imagination. That's good. That's good. That's good that you have some imagination left over from childhood. You know, they do try to drum that out. So here's a good thing about Aspen. I can thank Aspen for where I am technically with Ruth. I ran into her on one of those wonderful crosswalk walks at Aspen one summer. And you know, Ruth doesn't lack courage. And she told me point blank that I didn't have her accent, that it was, she says, it's a hard accent, it's a South Jersey accent, it's not a Long Island accent. So I went back and listened again, and I was able to figure it out. She doesn't say wanted you, she says want ya. And even though she's a highly educated woman and has been a dean and everything else, she doesn't say hospital, she says hospital. So I just really listen to how she says the words that she says, and I know that it's not how I think she says them. But I do have tape recordings.
Hi, I'm Abigail Golden Vasquez with the Aspen Institute. I saw Let Me Down Easy a couple weeks ago, and it's amazing. So if any of you here haven't seen it, I recommend you go see it. But you had this incredible opportunity to spend so much time with so many people across the United States and across the world, and really interview them deeply and find out about their spirits and their passions. And I was just wondering if you could share with us what you learned about the human spirit from undertaking this endeavor.
Pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful. You know, I think again about Ingrid and Emma, this young woman who was 6 years old during the Rwandan genocide, trapped in a forest all by herself, walks out onto the road, had lost her sister because her family decided to split up so that nobody would be killed all at once. So she was with her sister, her older sister, she was 6. And she lost her sister, and she's walking in this forest at night. And then she comes out, and she sees her sister down the road, and her sister is on a line of people who are about to be killed. And just before they reached her sister, the killer said, "You know what, we're tired. We're just going to go home and eat. You kids, just go on home. You're going to be killed. You're going to be killed by sorrow." And when I interviewed her, it was at the stage of the work. Remember I told you that Mike Nichols had said to me my play was about kindness, and somehow in my head I twisted that to grace. I was looking for definitions of grace. So I went to an imam, sounds like a joke, right? Imam Faisal Ralph, who's now quite famous for Ground Zero, not at the time. A rabbi, Rabbi Wolpe in LA, Peter Gomes, who's now representing the play, James Cone, Buddhist monk. And when I asked her, what is grace? She said, well, I'm not so sure that what I mean by grace is what you mean by grace. And in Rwanda at the time, there was a campaign to ask for the Hutus to come and ask for forgiveness. And she says, I would like to forgive the people who killed my family, but, you know, you can't give forgiveness unless you're asked for it. And they won't come and ask for it. They're still oblivious to what they did. So she said, I'll just give them grace. And she said, I'm not holding them in my heart anymore. That is resilience. That is imagination. That is liberation. Freeing herself. Not from the pain, but freeing herself from that oppressive idea. And saying, if he comes and asks for the forgiveness, it's ready for him. But in the meantime, I just give him grace. And when you think about it, that's even like a grace note in music, right? So people are always offering me these incredible, that's a very strong example, these incredible twists and turns. On the other side, what I love so much about that bull rider is that he says to me, when you think about it, we shouldn't be able to stay on the back of a bull that's trying to buck you off because we weigh 150 pounds, they weigh over 2,000 pounds. And I think it's determination what keeps you on the back of that bull. Well, I mean, I hope that on a given night, somebody who's going through something in work, in love, and health gets courage from that idea that a lot of times the odds are completely against us, but we hang on, and that's called determination.
Great question, great answer. Lori?
Hi. I think, was it Lance Armstrong in the play who talked about being present
Yes.
in the moment around the table? So I was struck by that because I work with an organization called Be Present, and that works on gender, power, class, race issues and how to communicate and across those divides. And so I wondered if you would be willing to say something about what you feel is a key or a tie or a connection between that concept of being present in a moment and the possibility for, for grace and building durable relationships with other people.
Well, in terms of acting, of course, all actors, all performers are interested in this idea of presence, right? Because it can mean also charisma. The notion of the presence of an actor is that my presence will make you present, right? Or, our president has such, and has always, from that first speech that we all got a chance to see at the Democratic Convention, this extraordinary presence that we can't really define. We don't know why President Obama has that explosive presence that had transmitted all across the world. I was in Paris right after the election. The cab drivers, the usual French cab drivers, I wanted to talk all about it. They were so excited. So the best definition of presence from my field, my media, is by a theater practitioner named Joseph Chaikin, who actually wrote a whole book called The Presence of the Actor. It's a wonderful book. And in the moment that he defines presence, he says that presence, he says sometimes an actor won't have it in normal life, but they will have it on stage. And he calls it a deep libidinal surrender that gives you the feeling from the audience that the person is standing right next to you. So one of the people I go to study presence is my good friend and call her my big sister, Jessie Norman. So to hear Jessie Norman sing in Paris, where they love her so much, or Austria, everyone has that feeling that she's right there. I think it is, if you technically were trying to have presence, it has to do with simply paying attention and breathing. And then if you want to think about it in terms of grace and how to be present for others, I think that word that Joe Chaikin uses, surrender. It's a form of surrender, right? So even when I'm doing an interview, I know I'm not working well until I have this awful sick, like almost nausea in my stomach that goes, oh, you don't know this person at all. You did all this research, you think you know, you've been getting along quite fine, but now they've just said something, you don't know them, they are a stranger. You will never be them. And that's the place I start working. But I have to be present in that moment. I can't, it'd be very easy to just disregard that and go with what I know or what I want the person to be. So I would say that the word surrender is key.
Over here. I'm trying not to comment too many questions.
Hi, my name is Sophie. My question is about your audience. I know you described how your audience is usually a certain group of people, but I want to know more about how you think artists can blend a similar interest in vulnerable groups and bringing their shows to those vulnerable groups as the audience.
Well, shows or practices. I mean, Eve Ensler is in the Congo right now. I think that Eve has done amazing work in that regard because here's the funny thing about how we think about audience. So my play Twilight, I interviewed over 300 people after the riot, ranging from Daryl Gates, the former chief of police, who was he would say it was his lack of response that caused the thing. He would say that. He came up, he would say, I blew it, right? From him to, you're too young, but from him to a young African-American man who was televised beating up a white truck driver. That was the range of people I talked to, right? And in the middle of all that, I met a young gang member who was totally dedicated to trying to find peace among the gangs. Twilight Bay was his name. And he was one of my muses. I named the play after him. He never came to see it. I was here in Washington at the Million Man March. There really were a million men. You could not move. And who do I run into? Twilight. And I said, man, you come 3,000 miles to see Farrakhan? But you couldn't walk down the street because the theater was in the South Central area, a fancy theater on a hill, Mark Taper Forum, but still in that neighborhood. I said, you couldn't come a couple minutes to see the play? Yeah, I heard you kicked. I said, I named it after you. Yeah, I know, I tried to get there. So then we went back to talk to him when we made a film of it. And I said, Twilight, really, why didn't you come? He said, I tried to get there for you. I really tried. But there's just so much happening. We're so busy thinking we have something to give that people should see. He's thinking of it as something he's doing for me. So I think that we have to, if we work outside of the context of the tradition of what happens in these magnificent halls where people like me get to do my work, I get to be at the arena stage in this extraordinary hall, which I like being in that wonderful hall. There's not a whole lot of dust. I'm going to get to go to the Clarice Smith Center. It's everything I need to do my skill. Right? It's good for my sinuses, good for my voice. Nice dressing room with all my humidifiers, right? It's not so good for my voice to go some other places, right? But so we have to rethink this whole idea that we're bringing and giving so much, because I always think about what other people are bringing. And so I think before we even get there, we have to rethink that relationship of what we could possibly be giving. And this is very important as artists start to try to campaign to make sure that art stays in our society, what we expect from the government, what we expect from the president, what we expect from all of the people who work with him, what we expect from schools, is I think we have to rethink it and not be so high and mighty, and certainly not say we're doing things we don't do. I mean, I don't know if dance teaches math. I think it's pretty dangerous to say it does if it doesn't, right? But to say what it does do and to find the language to campaign for that, right? And in it has to do with who sees it, why should they see it, what does it have to offer them, and making relationships. You know, the bull rider will come, right? Twilight will come now. In fact, then I hear from him years later. Hey, you remember me? It's Twilight. I'm writing a book. I thought maybe you could help me. Right? So that's a relationship. So it wasn't about coming 10 minutes to see the play, but the relationship is about helping him write a book.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a few more questions. Back there and then over.
I add my thanks to all the things that have been offered for your being here. My name is Lisa, and I am a native of Baltimore, born and raised, and you make me so proud to be from Baltimore. My question is about energy, and you described yourself as a person with a lot of energy, which is very obvious. And I'm curious how you draw energy from others, how you recharge your energy, how you keep your energy, how you keep it positive. If you could give us some thoughts around energy.
Well, you can't always draw energy from others. In the beginning of my career, I spent most of my time teaching, which I still love to do whenever I can. And I talk to all kinds of people, hairdressers, psychiatrists, masseuses, all kinds of people to say, how do you keep people from draining your energy? And I never really got any answers. And when I teach, I mean, I just go home and fall right in bed. I can't move. I cannot talk at the end of it. It is really, really, really draining. But I want to do it, so I do. And I've never figured out how to, quote unquote, protect my energy. The secret to energy, I'll give you all right now. It's very simple. For me, this performance, kale.
I knew you were saying.
Kale.
I knew you.
Kale, K-A-L-E, kale. Steamed kale, sauteed kale. There is red kale. I have a friend who says there is red kale. Now Whole Foods even has kale chips. High in calories. Look at the calories. You think it's going to be low because it's kale, dried kale. But they put yeast and all these other things in it that makes it delicious, but somehow it ends up being caloric. But there's kale juice. Washington hasn't got into the stepped up to the raw movement. You go to New York, there's plenty of places where you can get some nice kale juice.
I've seen it. It's true. It's true. Every meal I've seen her have here, I've had quite a few, it's been kale. So we'll go sweep around, Devin.
I had a question about the depiction of Baltimore on television, from the NBC series Homicide to the recent HBO dramas The Wire, The Block. Even though they're good guys, the overwhelming image you have is bleak, crime-ridden. I just wondered, do other Americans that you encounter have that image of your hometown, and what can be done to kind of restore it into some of the positive aspects of your city?
Well, I don't know, you know, because I haven't seen those shows. People do think of The Wire like Dickens almost. So, I mean, it's obviously a lot of artistic excellence and skill goes into rendering that. I don't know, and I do want to go back to Baltimore and take a look myself and sort of size that up. You know, just from my little sort of going back briefly, I did become more and more concerned in the 90s that the Baltimore that my mother and my aunts, all of whom were teachers, you know, the type of Baltimore they were trying to produce in terms of educating people, and all my mother's friends, I was concerned that it looked like, wow, what happened to that? But I don't know, and it's something I want to find out.
Gail?
Okay, I'm hoping it's not too complicated. My name is Gail Kitch. I'm trying to mull this over in my mind about trying to get to what I want to ask you, which is something about how to sustain what it is that you create in your performances in terms of what my sort of sense is of the kind of learning that goes on, the teaching to listen, the kind of empathetic piece that is basically what I sort of see you doing for your audiences. And the thing I worry about is, great when people walk out the door, but how do you ensure that they've really took away the kind of skill you're acting them to sort of activate, which is not just, you know, connecting with the doctor who talking with you know, these fantastic poor people, but literally when they walk out the door and look at the person on the corner or whatever, look and say, wait a minute, I understand that person is like the kind of fantastic people we're talking about. Not just loving the moment of having you give them the experience and sort of basking in that, which I think we all do a little bit, sort of trying it on. or being enlightened, having an aha moment because you've helped make that happen. But how do we all think about, for me, this is the core of civic engagement work, how do you really cause that to be sustained? Part of it may be to have multiple experiences, and it's not may not be necessarily the artist's responsibility, but maybe it's all of our responsibilities to understand that it's not just, boy, you had that moment, but you carry that learning, and someone actually, and it's on both sides. It's also similar for the vulnerable audiences to see it the other way. Everybody sort of has to learn how to do that, and I wonder how we do that.
So she should come work for Anna Deavere Smith.
I was
No, I mean, that is exactly why I started what was the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue in the 90s, and why I am now revisiting that project with what is called Anna Deavere Smith Works. You know, I struggled as an artist until I was 40 years old. Nobody cared a thing about my work. Nobody. And, you know, we don't need to hear all those stories. But so then I had been doing my work on the road to Search for American Character. The 13th play in that series was a play about riots between blacks and Jews in New York City. When I had my first rehearsal for that play, the designers, all of them, except for the costume designer, said to me, no one will care about this play. Nobody cares about race. All Caucasian people. Now, the night that Fires of the Mirror was supposed to open in New York was the night of the Los Angeles riots. The theater shut down. We went to the demonstration in Times Square. I felt like I was being pulled through to the theater by a wind tunnel every single night, all through the summer, as much as that play kept getting extended, and only stopped performing it because I was invited to come to LA, and I wanted to get there before while the city was still in trauma, right? And rushed off to LA after 3 months of performing in New York to start my interviews, right? And it was a very successful enterprise for me. You know, I got tenure at Stanford. They brought me up early. It's the first time in my life my father said congratulations when I called to say I had tenure. Wonderful things happened for me. And I am very grateful for all of that and feel guilty even saying the next sentence I'm going to say. But I began to wonder what else there was other than the people who came backstage to say congratulations. I really wanted them to say, what can I do? And so so then I became, the Ford Foundation invited me to come there and be in residence. And that's what I've been working on off and on, which is how do we combine, we all want to hear congratulations. All of us in this room want to hear that. But how do we combine the hard work of skill development that will allow you to, every once in a while, hear congratulations from someone who saw what you do. And I really love the people in the world. I call them the Dr. Dorns. Do you all know Chekhov's beautiful play, The Seagull? Well, you know that there's this calamitous thing that he does, the young, Kostya does his play, and his mother doesn't like it, and nobody likes it, and it's a disaster, and nothing works, and everybody leaves, and he's so crestfallen. And Dr. Dorn comes over to him after everybody's gone and says, I liked your play, and this is what I saw, right? So I'm very grateful for any moment of not just congratulations, but connection, when people see the effort that I'm trying to make and think that that's okay too, right? So, but how do we combine that with a project? If art is going to be in civic engagement, again, we can't just say that if it's not. And so I think your questions are right, Gail. But for that, I need partners, because I do have to attend to what is required technically. And I haven't been studying society the way that other people have. So part of my enterprise with Anna Deavere Smith Works is to find those partners and to combine artists, intellectuals, people doing work of social change, under one umbrella, so that we can learn more about how we can really be of service. And many, many artists who I know do want to be of service. Does that sort of answer the question? I mean, but last night, for example, perfect example. So SEIU came, right? So one of the things I admire about them is that they put a lot of money and time into finding out what gifts some of the low-paid healthcare workers have. The gifts that I'm most been exposed to are the gifts of communication, right? Whether it's to introduce Jesse Jackson at a rally or whether it's to get on the phone and try to get somebody to join the union. So they had a young woman worker on stage with David Dower, who works with the arena. And then I came out late. I knew if I came out first, everybody would ask me questions. But what I want to have happen is for them to talk to her. And so I think that was a very good structure last night with David and the worker. At a certain point, I came out, and then it's not about what I just did. It's using the convening power of the theater to take it someplace else. And so we could make these kinds of structural things happen all the time. Grab the moment.
Okay. Margaret, and then we're going to wrap up.
Hi, Margaret O'Brien, and I sort of caught you in the hall to say that we were able to work to invite 200 community health workers to your performance last Sunday, the matinee performance. Many stayed for the talk back with the, I guess she was an ethicist from GW. And it was really interesting. She said, you know, I went to the performance last week and I went today and the reactions were totally different. So I thought, you know, there's this silent communication that's kind of going on. It's not verbal between the audience and the art that I can't name, but just to have her say that, you know, I thought there was an interesting energy in that room, and so we got a lot of feedback, as you can imagine. Overwhelmingly, it was affirmation that what you captured affirmed what these people, a lot of young people working for nothing on the ground, are hearing and internalizing. So sometimes the communication is totally without words, and fascinating. So I wanted to add that.
Well, I think you just eloquently helped us understand the possibility and the challenge of bringing art into civic space by saying and naming that which is not the words, right? So this kind of way that I work began with my study of Shakespeare, when I realized that part of the reason he could bring such particularity in terms of identity and character to his work was the very moment when he departed from iambic pentameter, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And so I started to think about the possibility of thinking of language as a kind of a jazz, as language as an interpretive art, right? So if you come see my show, even though I'm striving to say every and every and it's highly technical, it's going to be different every night because of interpretation and also because of the audience. So I think by you naming the fact that part of what any artist in any art form is after is to expose the unspoken, that which is without words, is on the one hand the possibility, because that's what's closest to our heart, right? On the other hand, it's a problem in a verbal civic society which uses words to win points and kill things. Right. So how do we put that together? And I thank you for using those words.
Okay, one level.
May I just ask, because there's probably not time later, and I know how busy you are, but I would like to invite you to come and visit a program that we have with inner city DC high school students. We take distinguished writers into the classroom and sometimes into the National Gallery Auditorium with 4 or 5 different high schools represented there. And the questions and the students are so moved by this experience. We provide books, we train their teachers. We would love for you to be a guest at one of those events. I know you're terribly busy, but we would also honor you at a dinner, and there would be...
Kale? Is there going to be kale?
Oh, great.
And it's called, as my friend Shirley is reminding me it's called the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. It's a foundation that really does honor high school students. These are young people who are really moved, and our most, next week, our writer coming is Jonathan Franzen. But we would like for you to be a part of this ongoing series we have, and we would honor you. And you would
Okay,
be
thank you. Well, Anna, one of the ways she makes it through Washington going at the pace she does is discipline, which I clearly have not had by ending on time here, but I'm happy to follow up and connect. Anna and I have long-term, well, somewhat long, depends, partnership and respect. And I've just, from the work that we'll be building here at Ascend and taking on, looking at education, economics, and engagement, happy to connect on some of these opportunities. But I just, I want to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to sort of, we won't go with a silent close, but I'd ask you all to close your eyes for a moment. And I want to just share a few words and think what comes to mind. Effort. Excellence, imagination, surrender, resilience, grace, love. Join me in thanking Anna Deavere Smith.